Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob, and I'm here today to celebrate Pride with a Pride panel with some of the authors from Tiny Ghost Press. Tiny Ghost Press is an independent publisher specializing in queer young adult fiction with a spooky twist. So, without any further ado, let's meet our authors.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chloe Spencer, and I am the author behind Monstersona.
Hi, I'm Justin Arnold, and I'm the author of Wicked Little Things.
Hi, I'm Xan, and I'm the author of My Name is Magic.
And I'm Chris, and I'm the author of Against the Stars.
Amazing. And if we could just kind of go back around in that order and just give like your little elevator pitch for your book. That way, just in case anyone hasn't read your book yet, that would, how are you going to get them to buy it?
So Monstersona is a road trip story about two girls who have to travel cross country after a freak explosion destroys their hometown. And along the way, they're chased by mad scientists, armed men, and a monstrous secret which may threaten to tear the two of them apart.
And then Wicked Little Things is about a 16-year-old boy who has to go back to his hometown after his cousin is brutally murdered by the ghost of a serial killer. And if that's not enough, he also finds out he is the fated gay best friend of a trio of mean girls who are also witches.
Wow. My Name is Magic is a magic school story about non-binary Taika, who is at this international school for the magically gifted, and it's set in Finland, but they don't have any magic of their own. And they feel like quite the outsider, and like they don't really know what their place is in the world, and especially not at the school, until some spooky things start to happen, and they get pulled into somewhat of a murder mystery, somewhat of a mythological were-beastie chase through our sort of alternative setting of Finland, and also portal worlds. And magic and hijinks ensue. And Taika has a punk rock sidekick in Morgan, who seems to be a fan favorite.
And Against the Stars is a speculative romance set in a world where a company offers all over 16s the chance to have a vision of their future. A boy is starting to question his sexuality, decides to go and have one of these visions called glimpses, and sees himself with another boy, which makes him realize that he's bisexual. And what follows is a romance between the two, while there's some end of the world vibes going on in the background.
Amazing. And so as we just heard, you kind of all have approached fantasy in different ways. You know, there's magic schools, we're seeing the future where there's monsters, demons, and witches. So I would just love to kind of hear how each of you approached the fantasy in your books and kind of what work you did in creating the magic systems and different things like that. And anyone can take it away.
Okay, well, the magic in my book is heavily inspired by Finnish mythology. And I did quite a bit of research into Finnish mythology, going beyond what is popularly known as the Kalevala, which was a collection of folk stories that was later compiled and somewhat rewritten in a way that was touched by Christianity. And I wanted to try to get back to the very original Finnish folklore, the super pagan traditional stories. And so I did a lot of research into that, and I hopefully was able to bring some of the very rich and somewhat unknown lore of Finland into the story and into this book. And then I created a magic system based on both Finnish mythology and more sort of Norse rune magic systems, and it's kind of like an amalgamation of these two systems, so quite unique. And it's not a magic system that actually is lifted directly from any one mythology, that kind of picks and chooses bits and pieces. But yeah, heavily inspired by Finnish mythology, and all of the monsters and creatures come directly from Finnish mythology.
And for me, I for the witchcraft in Wicked Little Things, I went based on the historical American viewpoint of a witch. They thought they could control your mind and seduce you and get into your head and that sort of thing. So I really went based on that, and also growing up right at the foothills of Appalachia. There are people who still believe that can be done, and who's to say it can't. But I went based on that, and also I'm in an area that's very heavily steeped in urban legends and ghost stories. So I actually just used a lot of those and kind of made them my own.
I think that for me, with Monstersona, there's no magic system in Monstersona, but the kind of the concept for the monster itself is borrowed from a lot of like kaiju films, of course, like Godzilla. But also the design of the monster, I think, is borrowed. I've mentioned this in like other podcasts and things like that, but borrowed from things like How to Train Your Dragon. So like the colors that are used are very similar to like Toothless's design, because I really loved like the animation, like the appearance of that particular monster. And yeah, that's kind of where that comes from. Just kind of borrowed bits and pieces from those kaiju films and monster films.
And for me, it was sort of, I think that the sci-fi concept itself in the book is quite simplistic of, just this ability to see the future. But I really wanted my focus to not be on the sci-fi element. So I feel like it kind of takes a back seat in the story, because I wanted the focus to be more how this, this sci-fi concept impacts the human story. So the focus is really on the romance that develops, and the coming out story that happens as a result of this sci-fi business in the background. But then I also did, while writing it, think about how would this impact the world as a whole. If people had the access to things like being able to see the future, what would change? So there's like one bit I remember writing where they're in a funeral home, and there's like adverts on the wall for like, have you glimpsed your own death? Start planning your future, planning your funeral in advance today, because I feel like that is something that would probably happen if that existed.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the book They Both Die at the End.
Yeah, that was a huge influence in it.
It's giving me similar vibes to that. That book like devastated me emotionally.
Yeah.
I read that book in one day.
Wow.
I think isn't it because it's set in 24 hours, isn't it?
Yes.
So I actually read it in real time. I haven't read the prequel. I can't read the prequel because I can't have another nervous breakdown right now.
The prequel is excellent. You need to read it, but it will destroy.
I don't know. I barely survived against the stars. I don't think.
Well, I'm curious also, because all of these books have different kind of levels. Like you said, Chloe, you don't really have a magic system, but I'm curious, was there ever, with the four of y'all, any thought of maybe more or less, or kind of what went into the deciding factor of how much of a magic system? Because I know, like Xan, you have the huge magic system, and then we have Chloe on the other end without that. So I'm curious what went into kind of those deciding factors.
I think for me, a lot of it, to be honest, is when thinking like, I'm always really, really impressed by people who have like these super, super complex magic systems, particularly in like high fantasy. And I would really like to write something like that one day. But I'm just like, that seems like so much work and I can't do that right now. So going into mine, it was never even like in my head to super develop it. It was very much because I wanted the focus not to be on that. If I ever wrote another book in that world, then I would probably expand on that kind of thing. But for me, it was never the intention to fully delve into how that all works, because I don't think that that's the most interesting thing about the story in mine.
I'm kind of in the same boat with Chris, where I didn't feel, because the thing with the monster is that, because spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read the book, one of the girls can transform into the giant monster. And so, and she's been largely like kind of oppressed and abused and kept locked away from a lot of like information about her past. So in the context of this book, which is supposed to take place over a 24-hour road trip, it didn't, from the get-go, it did not make sense to me to dive into like all the nitty-gritty of why Aspen, the monster girl, is the way that she is. because she also just doesn't have access to that information, has been kept in the dark. But for like more like on like the creative side of things, or like the writing side of things, the idea of the girl being able to transform into the monster, it's like a metaphor for female rage, and like how our emotions kind of change us when we go through trauma, and how trauma like leads us to have things like rage attacks, and so makes us feel like giant monsters. So it felt kind of it felt like like for the purpose of the story itself, it didn't really need like an in-depth explanation. But same as with what Chris said, if I got a chance to write a sequel, there is so much that I could go into. So it would be fun.
And to piggyback off of both of them, like Chris said, when you said it sounds like a lot of work, that's so me. I didn't really make up hard and fast rules in the beginning. I just kind of wrote it and thought later. And then people would ask, well, how does this work? Well, why does this work and this doesn't? And I say, because magic. That's why. But also what Chloe said really kind of hit my point in that home, is that in Wicked Little Things, the universal fantasy here is this kid who has no voice, has no power, who's been traumatized, finds out, oh, guess what? You can do very wicked little things. And so it's about that, not so much the how it works and where it came from, but also, like Chloe said, some of us have gone on to figure out all of these little details that we'd love to share someday.
Yeah, I think for me it stems from I'm autistic and I like rules and I like details. I'm very detail orientated, and mythology has always been one of my intense interests from when I was a little kid. So I've always been steeped in Celtic mythology, Norse mythology, and I felt like I had a lot of prior knowledge. And so when I started researching Finnish mythology, things just kind of started to click into place and make sense for me. And using templates from existing mythology helped a lot. It wasn't like I created this, completely from scratch. But I was able to kind of pick and choose what I wanted from various mythologies and then combine them into this completely made up fantastical magic system that has very strict rules, which is it's essential because the story is set at a magic school where they're learning how to use magic and how to apply spells. So for me, I don't think it would have worked quite so well if there had been this magic, and you don't get to understand how this thing works when they're actively trying to understand how it works, and also which rules they can bend and which rules they can break and what the consequences of that are. Because my story is very much centered around the concept of, the choices we make and the prices we're willing to pay, what we're willing to sacrifice for this concept of the greater good, with a lot of moral ambiguity. And I wanted the characters to also maybe have to operate within magical paradigms that restricted them a little bit. So it was all those things that enabled me to just create those magic systems. And I loved it. I love my spreadsheets with all my little spells and with all my runes and which combinations work with which to create different spells and effects. So
you just kept like a set of like Google spreadsheets to kind of refer back to as you were writing then? Oh, cool.
Oh yeah, and I think there was one edit in particular, I think, where Josh was like, can you go through this just one more time and make sure everything like aligns and makes sense, and this element combined with this element and which rune is which? And I was like, yes, absolutely. Get my spreadsheets out. And I went through everything and documented everything, because I keep like fairly extensive world Bibles as I work through stories.
You don't want to see how I keep mine.
Yeah, I know this is not how everybody works.
Post-its randomly on the walls, not always in the same room. Chaos.
Wow.
I think that the Post-its sound better than I typically tend to like make when I start working on a story. I've started using, I kind of used to be like what the phrase is, like a pantser, where I just write things like just straight out of the gate. But lately, like more and more, thank God, I have been writing with outlines and things like that. But prior to that, what I would do when I started a story is I would add comments where like lore would need to go and like make sure that that was written in and then like resolve it. So it was chaotic and like buried. And yeah, I just have to kind of hope for the best and then I can remember it. But yeah.
I've really found that I just can't finish a story unless I've got a plan in place. I admire the people that can just fully pants a whole novel and then get it published. I'm like, how did you manage that? For me, I like start by just listing all the characters and descriptions so that I don't ever forget, you know, what this person looks like. And then I go through like chapter by chapter what happens, and then sometimes like go back and change bits later. But I need that whole thing outlined before I go in.
It's so fascinating.
I do too. It's just not. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I think there's like a bit of a delay with you, Justin. You go, because you started speaking.
What's new?
Go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, I like say my outline. It's just not. It's not as pretty as I'm sure Xan's and Chris's are.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's fascinating to hear about different creative processes, and I used to sort of think that I was more of a pantser as well, and I really struggled. Like writing was hard because I didn't really have a plan, or I felt like, well, if you have a plan, then it's boring to write the story because you know what's going to happen. But then I did this, Maggie Stiefvater, the author of The Raven Boys. Mm-hmm. She had this course, and one of the biggest takeaways for me, because she just outlines her process, not like she teaches you how to write. It's just like this is what she does and what works for her. But one of her beginning points, like what she starts from, is how do you want the reader to feel? And how do you want the reader to feel at the beginning of your book? And how do you want them to feel at the end of the book? And just thinking about that has helped me so much in terms of like creating the shape of the story and then starting to develop like character arcs from that. And sometimes I don't need to know exactly what happens like every chapter. I just need to know where my main character starts and where I want them to end up. And then kind of figure out as I'm writing their story what needs to happen to make those changes possible.
Yeah, that sounds like really an interesting way of doing it. Because then I guess whenever you're like at a point where you're stuck, you can just refer to that back to the where do they need to end up? How can I drive them further towards that? Yeah, exactly. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to use it.
I'm working on that. I'm working on that kind of outline for another YA book right now, where I'm trying to like track like the character arcs from beginning to end and have that be like a little bit more clearly established. And it's gotten me actually even more excited to be able to work on writing that one. So, yeah.
And I'm curious because now you've all kind of talked about different things that you did with these books, but also you said, oh, like a couple of you mentioned, oh, well, if I get to do a sequel or if I get to do something else. So I'm just very curious if there's anything that you didn't do in these books that you're really like you didn't really have a magic system in this, and if you want to do a magic system, I mean, is there really anything like in terms of fantasy or magical elements you really would love to kind of play with in something in the future?
For me, I'm definitely interested in working on like steampunk and things like that. I really have I grew up reading a lot of I don't know if anyone's familiar with like the Girl Genius webcomic, but I loved Girl Genius when I was a kid. And lately I've been getting back into kind of reading the novels and also like looking at the webcomic and other things that are kind of like steampunk adjacent. And I've been like, I kind of really want to dive into that, which is why I think with that particular book that I'm approaching, I want to be very, very, very specific and do a lot more extensive research, because that's already a genre that I think has like a significant like history and things like that that it explores. So that's definitely something that I want to explore next, because I just think those worlds are so fun.
For me, I I'm like at a point now where I've got so many different ideas that I really want to go into that I'm kind of like stuck. So I'm writing something right now that I'm quite a way into that I do need to finish, and I will force myself to finish. But then there's so many other ideas that I feel like, but I want to do that one now. So I'm having to stop myself. And a few of those are like more down the fantasy end. So, you know, there's a few that are like more the sort of urban fantasy vibe. But then I definitely have some more high fantasy ones that will need a lot of like actual world building, because as an autistic person with a special interest in D&D, I would love to do a D&D type of vibe in a book, but who knows which one will be the next, because there's too many ideas. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I was telling Chloe I was dreading this question because there's things I can't say. I will say, kind of like what Chris said, having so many ideas, and then half of them, I really cannot. I will never be on another panel again, because I will not be a tiny ghost author if I reveal too much. But I will say, a book I would love to write. I've always loved Gothic fiction. Like Rebecca, The Little Stranger, Shadow of the Wind. I would love to write something like that someday. Like that to me would be I've honed my skills. I've got to this point, I can pull this off now. That would be like.
Yeah, I love Gothic fiction. I was actually thinking, my stories have always been dark, but have never been true horror. But lately, I've just been reading some stories that have really stuck with me. I don't know if any of you have read Lee Mandello's Summer Suns.
No, I need to though.
You need to. You need to. I read that last year, and it's still a book that I think about. And I never thought I'd really be interested in a boy book about cars. Really, it's just that kind of story. Yeah. But it's so much more than that, and I just fell in love with it, and it's really stuck with me. And then I read, the author is Vietnamese, and I do not remember their entire name. I know that it's something Tran. It's called She is a Haunting.
She is a Haunting. Yeah, I have it on my shelf somewhere. Yeah, She is a Haunting.
Yeah, and I read that recently, and then I also just read Delicious Monsters, and that like haunted house vibe with like these ghostly weird things happening, that is something I desperately want to explore. I would love to write like true horror. I don't know what yet, but yeah, that's something I'd like to explore. Even darker stories.
Mm-hmm. And so pivoting away from kind of the magical fantasy elements for a moment, I would kind of just love to hear a little bit about your writing process in general, especially with these books. You know, did you kind of have an idea for a story you wanted to tell and then the characters came later, or did you have this magic system first? And kind of what was the seed of what you did, and how did you kind of water it and make it kind of grow?
So for me, one of my favorite bits of writing advice I've ever heard was from Patrick Ness, who said that when he comes up with an idea, he doesn't start to write that one until another idea sticks to it. And so then for me, with Against the Stars, you know, it sort of started with what would it be like if there was this technology that let people see the future, but like only a very short vision, and if it was guaranteed to happen. And just thinking about that, I was like, oh, that's a fun idea, because I've always been very, very into sci-fi. But then I was like, that's not enough though. That's firstly not original enough, and secondly, it's just there's not a full story ready there. And then I had the idea of, what if there was someone who was confused about their sexuality, and they had one of these visions, and that's what made them realize that they were queer, and how would that impact someone? Like if that's the way you learn about it, and how confusing would that be, and what would that make you do? And then I was like, oh, now here's a story that it feels more original and like it can fill an entire book. So that's where the idea came from. And then, like I said earlier, I always start by, outlining. I think the character-wise, Elliot came first, because he's obviously the character that's doubting his sexuality. And then I created Seb as sort of I wanted there to be a difference between them enough that it could cause conflict, and also for them each to grow in different ways and bond over that. So Seb sort of came out of, well, Elliot has this sort of life. What would create an interesting dynamic? What kind of person would be interesting to write as a counterpoint to him? So they both came first, with Elliot starting it off, and then then I outlined the whole plot and then went into the writing of it.
I guess for me,
I'm waiting for Justin to speak. That's why I'm quiet. I'm waiting for Justin to speak.
And he told me I have a delay, so I'm always afraid that I'm going to cut someone off.
Yeah, so I guess for me, I always knew that I wanted to write like a road trip story that involved monsters from the very beginning. And then I think the concept came earlier than the characters did for me. And I kind of had to think about the trajectory that I wanted them to drive. And then I kind of like built the world around that and built the idea of the characters around that. They were just, so it just kind of, I would say concept first, characters later, and then pretty much just wrote. And I did put together an outline for Monstersona, which I think later became, this is bad to admit, but it later became abandoned because I had more ideas than I think that like the outline could accommodate, or sometimes I write faster than I can plan. So I ended up kind of going with the outline and then sort of working my way through the story and figuring out what I wanted the characters to do from there. So yeah.
For me, it's kind of a strange idea because I was playing Ori and the Will of the Wisps, or Ori and the Blind Forest. I can't remember at the time when I first started writing it. And also one of my other favorite games is Hollow Knight. And I was like, I would love to write a story that's like this game, not like in terms of the mechanics or plot, but that feels gamey somehow. That was like the initial thought in my head. And that's where I think in My Name is Magic, there is this element of like portals and like traveling to this world that's beyond the veil, like the other side of this magical veil. So even though that was sort of like the initial concept, the book that grew out of that is so vastly different and isn't really gamified at all. But that's kind of that original impetus, or that incipient idea was this kind of connected to the games I was playing at the time. And I wanted to write something that was a little bit younger and a little bit on the sweeter side for me, because I tend to write really dark, and magic is still pretty dark. And so it was kind of like the vibe and this idea. And then because I work at an international school, I was like, well, I imagine sort of, the kids I teach, what kind of book would they want to read? Who in my class doesn't get seen? And that was kind of these different ideas that all came together and eventually evolved into the story that I have.
And for me, it was, I got Dane first. And I didn't know his story whatsoever. I didn't even know his full name, but I knew his middle name of all things. And so it became a matter of trying to figure out where he even went, because all I knew is I had this imaginary boy in my head who never shut up, but he wouldn't tell me what his story was. And I would stick him in a lot of different ideas and never worked out. And then meanwhile, I was working on this other story idea that was about this witch who helped ghosts, and she wore a red jacket, and there was a werewolf. And I thought, what the heck? And I threw him in there, and that became Wicked Little Things.
That's cool. You just blended the two things together.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I said neither of you are working, so
It's actually funny how that works. I think it was I can't remember, it was one of the first YA authors who really blew up, but she showed like a notebook that she kept all her different ideas in, and like she had like ticked off different ideas that then she like smooshed together to create what then became like one of the best-selling YA novels. And I cannot remember the name of this book, but it was about a sort of monster creature with blue hair in Prague, and the opening scene is like the boyfriend like it pretends it's a vampire, and it's like
Is
the
it
like
Daughter
an
of
angel
Smoke
and
and Bone?
yes, thank you. Oh my goodness, my brain. Sorry,
Okay.
Daughter of Smoke and Bone.
I think
Who is the
I've
author?
definitely read about Lainey Taylor.
Lainey Taylor.
Lainey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. She was the one, and she had this, I think it was a blog post where she showed how she took all of these like seemingly disparate ideas and smooshed them into a story, and it became such a rich, interesting world that she managed to build.
That's cool.
Yeah. I don't know if I saw the same one you did, but I think she also put out something that she'll also keep lists of just things she likes.
Yes.
Like, I like antique bottles. I like fairy wings. I like the smell of old books. And she'll actually like, that makes her like aesthetics, I guess. I thought that was kind of cool.
That is interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and another author friend of mine actually like showed how they used life experiences, or they had moments, and it could even have been something as simple as just a sensory moment, like hearing a particular bird sound or a particular color, unusual color of a sunset or something, and then makes notes of these and lists them, and might even write a word or two of description like in that moment thinking about this thing, and then how that gets like threaded into their stories, and some of those like original in the moment descriptions end up in books 2, 3, 5 years down the road. And I love that. So I've been trying and mostly failing to do this myself, but I thought it was a really great way to like capture these moments that very visceral moments that you can later like put into your own stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you, once you kind of had this this idea, the core of it all, how did you then go and build the kind of world around them and kind of fill it out with the side characters and the antagonists, and how kind of what was the process like of kind of filling out the world after that?
So for me, I wanted each of the two main characters to have, you know, a key friend to go to in the scenes when because I didn't want them to just spend the whole book interacting with each other, because I think that would be dull. So, you know, with Elliot, I wanted him to have, given that he's in a situation where he's questioning his sexuality, he's never even considered that he might not be straight until near the beginning. I felt like it would make sense for him to not, therefore, have close queer friends. So his best friend is straight. And what I really wanted to show with that character was that straight allies exist and they can be really good. And I know that a lot of people that have read it have said that they really liked that character of Callum. But particularly what people have really liked is Seb's best friend, Aim, which has been lovely to see. So with him, because he's always been out, well, not always, but for a very long time, you know, I felt it made more sense with him for his best friend to also be queer. So his best friend is trans. And I feel like that then just adds more to the different vibes of Elliot's life and Seb's life, with Elliot and having no experience of this culture, whereas Seb is very much immersed in it. And then obviously there's sort of the B story, I guess, in the background, where there's this end of the world vibes going on in the background, and at the end of each part, because the book's divided into different parts, there you'll get a chapter from this mysterious third perspective, which I think came to me quite early, because, you know, the focus was always the romance, and I found that quite easy to think, where would this go? But I wanted there to be some more to it, because I felt, you know, if we have got something this big in the world as this technology, then there will be more going on. And there would definitely be people that were against it. So that's where all the protests and stuff came from. And then I thought, you know, how would you take that to the extreme? And so then I was thinking, oh, there would probably be people trying to take this company down. And that's sort of where that extra story came in. But I always saw it as, you know, very much the less important of the two key stories, so it ends up impacting the main one, obviously, and I always felt that they'll come together at the end. But yeah, that's where that came from, just as to flesh out the world, I guess.
I'm still afraid to talk. Like, for me, when I finally got Dane into the correct story, who came next was EJ. Because I knew there would be this whole romance and he would meet his first boyfriend. And I think for me, I don't know what I'm giving away about myself, but EJ's just kind of, I don't know, wish fulfillment, I guess. If I were still a teenage boy, who would I want flirting with me? It's EJ. He was very easy to create because he needed to be a perfect foil for the main character, so he just kind of appeared. And then the other one who showed up very quickly was Hannah. And she is actually based on my best friend, who I've known since I was 12. And when I was coming up with her, I wrote just a very quick description. Her name's Hannah Allen, she's a dead ember in a world of confetti. Because I was trying to sum up this person I was basing her on. And that line it is in the finished book. It never changed. That's the one line that has been there since the very beginning. It's about Hannah. And then shortly after that, I was like, if you're going to write gay Sabrina, he needs an animal that can talk, because that was one reason I didn't finish the first episode of the new Sabrina, is because Salem didn't talk. And so for me, that's why I liked Sabrina. So I said, you know what, my animal's going to talk, and raccoon is total, again, wish fulfillment on my end. I've always wanted a raccoon, so I said, he's getting a raccoon. And then, yeah, from there, it was kind of like Chris said, it's okay, well then we'll need this. If you have this, now you need this. And how does this work? And it all kind of snowballed from there. But those were my fabulous four, I guess.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to remember, because I wrote this book quite a while ago. Like, it's the first iteration of the story, and it underwent a major revision prior to finding a home with Tiny Ghost. And I'm actually genuinely struggling to remember. Definitely Taika came first, because they were always the voice in my head, and they were always the kid I kind of imagine needing to go on this journey, and whose voice I wanted to finally have the world hear, and to show their journey of self-discovery. But after that, I actually don't remember who came next. I do remember creating Morgan fairly early on and kind of developing his character to be one that challenged Taika, but also affirmed Taika, because I think that that's something that's so important in a close friendship, is that you shouldn't just have a friend who, says yes to everything about you and doesn't challenge you on things that, maybe when you need to change your perspective or listen to a different voice or listen to, I don't know, just like to keep you open-minded and to help you grow. I think friends should help each other grow. And so that was kind of Morgan's role in the story, as well as, being a super cool punk rock skateboarding kid for readers to swoon over, which apparently worked pretty well. I'm quite thankful for that. And yeah, probably a little bit of my own wish fulfillment there too, Justin. You're not alone. So yeah, and then I think, as Chris said, it was kind of like, what does the story need, and what does Taika need to get them from their starting point to their end point, and what needs to challenge them, and what needs to push them to grow in the way that is going to get them through the story. And then it just evolved from there, I guess.
Yeah. For me, when writing, I remember coming up with Riley and Aspen characters first, as kind of people who were strangers to each other, who were both closed off for their own reasons in like different ways, and then kind of went about building the characters that I wanted them to have from there. So For Riley, she is kind of naive. She's not really that inquisitive. She she's got this very solid kind of black and white way that she thinks about the world. So like, you know, she starts off this book as like thinking, oh, my mom is the one that like asked for the divorce with my dad, and she's the one that moved us out across the country. She's the parent that is like less practical, and my dad is the parent that is practical, that I don't know, like she kind of puts her father on this pedestal. And I knew that I wanted to kind of unpack that sort of understanding that she had of her parents, and understand that actually like they aren't just like these archetypes, but they're actual people. Talking about the idea of like parental lore, and just that there's things that they have lived through that she just has not shared that experience with them. And then kind of when I knew that Riley's mother was going to pass away, and that the idea of parental grief was going to be a big aspect of the book, I kind of built more characters from there. And I was like, well, Aspen and Riley are closed off to each other, so Riley needs like a little friend that can accompany her on her journey. So then that's why Tigger was there from the beginning, is Tigger's kind of this emotional companion that's been with her from the very beginning, who kind of gives her this sense, he grounds her a little bit. And then when you progress throughout the story, you've got all these other characters. You have Healy, who is this capitalistic monster that is okay with preying on young girls' bodies in order to advance his own interests for profit. And then you have Corinne, who is kind of like this failed revolutionary type character, or like I wouldn't say, well, flawed revolutionary type character, who I think is trying to advocate for Aspen and Riley to try to like improve the world, or improve the things that have kind of fallen apart in a very aggressive and violent way, which doesn't work for them. So kind of the same themes where Aspen and Riley knew that they wanted to kind of unpack what was going on with Titan Tech, but they didn't know exactly how they wanted to like take them down. And Corinne has this way of showing them what she wants to do, but yeah, it doesn't work out. But then later, as you get through the book, there's other characters like Elvis, who I think was supposed to be this kind of example of positive masculinity, and like a good, like a very good like male role model for the girls, who's just very kind to them, and isn't weird towards them. And then there's Fern, who, because Riley is this character who has lost her mother, Fern is a woman who has lost her daughter. And so they're kind of opposites of each other in some ways. And Fern is further like on her grieving journey. So Fern kind of represents not only this other like mother figure for Riley, but also this kind of this hopeful source for her to kind of be able to make peace with the fact that she's lost her mother one day. So that's kind of how so I pretty much just kind of wrote based off of what characters I thought that the girls would need to encounter, and who was going to add challenge, but who was also going to kind of provide moments of levity. And so that was a challenge throughout the book too.
Yeah, and so like I mentioned at the beginning, so Tiny Ghost specializes in queer young adult fiction. So, you know, that's one of the big reasons we're here. So I'm very curious how you all kind of approached crafting these queer characters and kind of making that such an integral part of their identity, but not without kind of making it feel like it's just while incorporating it in a very seamless way. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. How do you kind of incorporate that? And how did you go about doing that?
I was saying so much of it just draws from my own experience. And I started writing My Name is Magic at a time when I had just recently come out at work as non-binary. And, you know, it sounds like such a cliche, but like wanting to write a book that I would have loved to read at that age. Like if I had read a story or found a character, not even like the story, but found a character like Taika when I was, say, 12, 13, and starting to go through serious like gender crisis, a gender identity crisis, I think it would have been so helpful. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to write a very explicitly non-binary character, and to really give this character a voice, and to have Taika's gender identity not be an issue in the book. There are moments of bullying where their gender identity is kind of, used to hurt them, but that's very quickly dealt with on page, which I thought was important as well. But other than that, it's not a coming out story. It's just, this is who they are, and then they have this whole other life to live. And I wanted to kind of show that your gender identity, your sexuality is just a part of who you are, and everyday life continues. And similarly, I wanted to populate this world with a diverse array of characters, including diverse sexualities and gender identities. So other characters, like Morgan is bi, possibly pan. He's still kind of trying to figure out where he fits on the spectrum. And there are other characters, a lesbian character, a possibly asexual character, because these kids are also like 14, 15. So a lot of them are still questioning and figuring things out. And I also wanted that to be shown to be like, okay, no one is expecting a 14 or 15-year-old to have this stuff figured out yet. And if you don't have it figured out at 35, that's also okay, and it can be fluid and it can change. So I think that was kind of like how I approached it. Just what would I have wanted to find? What kind of characters would I wanted to find? What sort of exploration of identity would I have wanted to read about when I was that age that I could have found helpful? So that was my approach.
Yeah, I feel very similarly, that it's very much influenced by my own experiences. So I didn't come out until I think I was 20. Not that anyone was surprised. I always had, like, my core group of friends has always been a very diverse and queer group of friends, and sort of every year another one will come out. Some people have come out multiple times because, as Xan says, it's fluid and it changes. And when we were teenagers, we didn't all know, and people have realized that it's more complex than what they originally thought. So I've always been surrounded by friends who are part of the community. Even now, like, two friends that I've had since high school, I live with them both, and both of them are trans non-binary. So that all went into not just the two main characters, but also, like, AIM as a side character, very much influenced by my friends. And like Xan said about writing a book I would have wanted to see is definitely true. I think the first book I read with a gay main character was probably Patrick Ness's More Than This, which I think I read like 2014-ish. And until then, I hadn't really read it. But and my first encounter of a queer character will have been in Doctor Who, which is also one of my special interests, and that's probably part of the reason. But other than those like little bits, there was, it wasn't everywhere at all. There's so much more that it could have been present in, and I really loved over the last few years, this really this huge increase in queer YA as well, because I think it's just so important for teenagers to be able to see themselves represented. And like Xan, I also work in a school, and so I've seen the children that are the target audience of these, and I have, when I started, so I'm that school librarian, so when I first started, a lot of the queer children, seeing me as an openly queer adult, would come and they'd ask for these books with this representation that had never been in their library before, and I immediately ordered all the ones I'd read and did more research to find ones I hadn't read, and just filled the library with so many beautiful queer books. So I just really wanted to add to all of that, because that's what I wish I would have had.
I think for me, similarly, as y'all have said, I wrote, I think I knew that I wanted to write two characters who were bisexual out on the page, and I didn't want it to be like a coming out story. But similar to what y'all have said, I wrote kind of from a place where I was reflecting on my own experiences, like coming to terms with the realization that I was bisexual or that I was queer. And I remember, like, back in back in when I was a teenager, like in the 2010s, there was like a lot of negativity or biphobia like surrounding bisexuality. Like it's not real, it's not real, it means that you're indecisive, things like that. And so when it came to writing Aspen and Riley, who are both bisexual characters, Aspen is a character who I think is way more confident in her bisexuality, and Riley is like a little bit less confident. Like Riley, I makes a comment somewhere in the book where she talks kind of about how she had a gay uncle that told her that like she is going to decide to be like some other sexuality, or that like implies that bisexuality isn't real. She comments that she is this person who she says, I wish I could just be either gay or I could be straight and I don't have to like deal with this. She does admit that to herself at like one point in the book. And I think that my point in writing that was it was how I felt when I was a teenager. I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like bisexuality is a label that has very, very much like freed me. But when you're a teenager, I think that you have a messier understanding of your identity. And so to me, it wouldn't have felt real if Aspen and Riley were both like, yes, we're bisexual and we have no feelings about this. It's like, no, they like Riley's absolutely not the type of character that's like super confident in life in general. So I was like, so why would this be the one thing that she's confident, like super confident about and has no hangups on? Which thankfully, like that seems to have been interpreted the way that I intended it, which is like, this is just a young person that's like being messy about their identity and things like that. No one's come for me. And I hope that continues to be the case. But yeah.
I think pretty much the same for me. I think I had to have been like 23 or 24 the first time I saw a young adult book that had a gay lead. So it hadn't even occurred to me that I could write a gay lead in a book. And then, I don't know, there was some sort of epiphany one night and I wanted to write about Dane, so I did. And sorry, to the point of the question, I don't remember ever sitting down and thinking, okay, here's how I'm going to incorporate it. I just did, because its own voices. As a gay author, I was able to write the gay character, I feel. And also, the book is set around the same place that I grew up. So a lot of things that come up, a lot of offenses that he encounters, that sort of thing, actually happened either to me or to someone I knew. It's all very authentic there. So I never really had to sit and think, okay, I'm going to make sure I include this and I'm going to talk about this. It all came out very naturally for me.
And in this kind of world we're living in now, where books are being banned, things are a little scary. What does it kind of feel like for you to have put out work that kind of puts these queer characters at the forefront?
It feels heavy. It's like, I mean, it's one of those things where I no matter what happens with all these book bans and everything, I mean, luckily it's what I'm seeing from America, it's truly terrifying, and the UK is not much better at all. We're having, particularly towards trans people right now, it's all horrific to see. But the book banning isn't something that's really happened here yet, and as a librarian, I truly hope I don't have to deal with that. But no matter what happened with it, I would never stop telling these stories, because for me, I know that I've created stories and written things as far as I can remember, but the first, and I tried to get some books, I wrote some books and sending them to agents and things before Against the Stars that never really got anywhere. The first time I really ended up having any really positive responses was when I was writing queer fiction. And I don't think it's because, some people would probably say, oh, it's because you can't get published as a straight person anymore, which is nonsense. I think it's because I was then being honest in the writing, and the writing improved because of that, because I wasn't, pretending or anything anymore. And I don't think that people have to just write within their own personal experience at all. I don't think, if you're queer, you have to write queer stories. I don't think that should be a rule at all. But I feel for me that when I write queer stories is when the writing's the best, because it's so much more honest and real. And I think then that comes through to the reader, because they're like, yeah, I can see this, that, you know, you understand what you're writing here. But yeah, so it would never stop me. And I hope that we manage to, you know, our contributions can help fight against all the terrible things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I feel so helpless when I watch what's going on, particularly in the United States and in the UK. I mean, and in parts of Europe, we're not immune to it. I mean, look at what's happening in Poland and Hungary, and even here in Finland, and what's considered to be like one of the progressive Nordic states. We now have a super conservative government that's just formed, and it's honestly terrifying, because they're going after minorities and trans people and LGBT plus people in general are going to be on their hit list as well. It seems to be what's happening the world over. And yeah, it is quite depressing sometimes, to be honest, and really saddening. And yeah, just the sense of helplessness. And the only thing I can do, of course, like supporting charities, etc., obviously, but also like is write my experience, write characters, LGBT plus characters, into stories that, if it manages to change one person's mind, or if it triggers compassion in just one reader who otherwise, you know, had dehumanized LGBT plus people, if it just manages to somehow change a mind or open a mind to a different consideration of human rights, then, you know, that's my minor contribution that I've made. So same as Chris said, I will never stop writing LGBT plus stories. And if anything, I feel now even more determined to push the envelope and to push the boundary, and to just, all my characters are queer in a completely queer normative world where nobody is cis and straight anymore. The utopia, right? People are rare.
I needed that laugh because this got dark.
Yeah.
Speaking as, and I don't know, I'm sure Chloe has her own points to make on it as well, but as someone who does live in the United States, with all that's going on, and as someone who is in the southern eastern quadrant of,
yeah,
and yeah, I think you're even further down than I am.
yeah, Georgia, yeah.
It is terrifying and infuriating, and just day after day having to sit and think, okay, what can I say today and not get in trouble? Like, can I speak for my own rights today? I don't know. Is that going to get me in trouble in my personal life, like out where I am and all of that? That's getting way more difficult. But like you guys said, like I'm never going to stop writing that. I also am very fortunate that I have a very good found family, and my local library actually has the book in their catalog now, which that's the children's section that teen section that I grew up in, when there were no gay books. And I'll say that I was invited to speak at their teen writers group. And I was warned before going in that there are kids in there who aren't allowed to read gay books or see gay people or read magic or any of that. So I was given that rundown, and it was fine, and they were nice to me. Well, then I found out afterward that someone actually gave them a copy of my book. And so I was very nervous about what that would do for them at home and how that would make me look as the local queer witch writer. But it actually turned out to be good for whatever reason. I guess maybe because I am local, maybe because they had met me, their parents let them read it. Surely they didn't know all of the content in it, or that never would have happened. So there's little silver linings like that, I will say, but
yeah.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. For me, being based in like I'm based in Georgia right now, in the like Atlanta metro area, which isn't, it's nothing has gotten like super bad, at least in the metro area, but the state as a whole is definitely, there's been book bans, there's been, I believe some drag bans that have, been passed or like attempted to push their way through like legislation. It's definitely, kind of a scarier time. This is something that like I was reflecting on when Pride Month started, and I like made like a little post on Instagram, and I remember how when I first came out of the closet, I was like, you know what, this feels really bad right now, but in 10 years down the line, like kids are not going to have to go through the same thing that I went through. And then to see what's happening right now, it feels like feels like a knife to the gut. Because it's like, oh, in some ways things seem worse because I don't remember being told not to read like queer fiction and having that banned from my library and having it, banned from my access. It was not, I don't remember that being like the mentality at the time back then. Then again, I grew up in Minnesota. So maybe there's just a different culture. So it makes it like Chris said, it adds a weight to it, and it makes what we're doing all that much more important. And I think it's also important for us. I know that like we've each had our share kind of in writing like messy characters. And I think what's even more important about what we're writing right now, like we're not like writing things that I think of like cookie cutter or like sanitized and things like that. We are writing queer people as queer people are kind of meant to like live their lives and explore things. Like Aspen and Riley are kind of go through their stages of grief and messiness and violence and anger and rage, and they're allowed to feel that on the page, and no one is allowed to kind of take that away from them. And so in my mind, there's power in letting that be on the page rather than this is somebody that conforms, this is somebody that just like sticks to the status quo. This is somebody that's not going to like, this is somebody that doesn't challenge the rules. And I'm like, no, they do. And I think that that's even, I think that that's going to be more important as the years follow in the years to come.
Yeah, and I did get a bit darker than I intended. So to not end on that kind of a downer note, I do. I would like to reframe that a little bit. How does it feel then in kind of this darkness that we kind of just discussed? To kind of that, it's good that we kind of had that conversation for the context. How does it feel then knowing that you're putting out these books and kids are finding them and they have access to them? Or, even Justin, you said, in a scary world where maybe you didn't think they would have access, this kid did. How does it feel knowing kind of you're putting out these books, and how does it feel writing these books knowing that context?
I think it feels really, yeah, for sure, rewarding and like a really important thing to be doing. I mean, it can be frustrating sometimes to feel like, I guess everything you write is going to inherently be seen as like an agenda pushing, when that's not what we're doing at all. But also at the same time, we are wanting to make the world a better place for the teens and children of today. And like Against the Stars is a very there's a lot of darkness in the book for sure. Like it gets very, very heavy. But what was very clear to me from the beginning was to end it on a hopeful note, because I think that that's the important thing to hold on to, is that no matter how terrible everything seems, there will be a time when it's better. And like yesterday I was at a Pride event locally talking about my book, and I saw so many children waving pride flags and progress pride flags and trans pride flags, and it was just so beautiful to think, because the area I'm in is never seen as like a super queer positive place, but just to be at that, in that moment, and seeing all this, I was like, okay, so there is some hope. Here they are. Like there are some parents raising their children to be accepting, and for some people it's never going to be an issue, and that's beautiful to see. So yeah, I guess it feels really good to be adding to that hopeful message.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and especially in my context of the school, one of the main reasons why I came out was because I had a non-binary kid in my class, And I was like, wow, if I can't even advocate for myself, if I can't even be open with my colleagues, how is this 11-year-old expected to kind of navigate this in an environment where they feel completely alone and without allies? And that really motivated me to kind of take these steps. And it's felt terrifying personally to be that vulnerable myself in a professional environment where I am working in an international environment where there are an array of attitudes and beliefs to contend with, not just among my colleagues, but also among the parents, right? So we have some very religious families at our school and super progressive families at our school, and there are obviously always culture clashes. Thank goodness we operate within the paradigm of Finland that legislatively protects human rights and protects LGBT plus rights, particularly within an educational context. So children have the right to express their gender and to identify as they want to, and have the right to, bathroom access, things like this, which they're trying to curb in the States. But just I had one non-binary student come up to me and say that they had read my book and how much they enjoyed it. And then they thanked me for writing a non-binary character. And they were like all smiles and happy, and they didn't think it was a big deal. And then they kind of walked away. And I was left there like not being able to breathe. And I was like on the verge of tears, because I was like, they had no idea how much that meant to me, or like how scary it was for me to write so openly about my own experiences and my own identity, and then to put that book on the school shelf where I know students I interact with are going to read that, and parents and colleagues are reading, my book that has, it's not Taika isn't me, or I'm not Taika, but like has elements of personal experience in it. So you feel very naked with that, I think. And so that was just an incredible moment. And I think it's little moments like that it's not just rewarding, it goes beyond rewarding. It's like it like bolsters my resolve to keep shouting about LGBT plus rights, even at a world that seems to not be wanting to listen right now. And little moments like that, just, yeah, it keeps me motivated.
For me, I mean, it makes me feel like a superhero, honestly. Or maybe like an anti-hero. I haven't decided yet. But just being, I'm actually a big, huge fan of Colette, the French writer. And over 100 years ago, we're talking about a woman who wore pants when that was illegal, who had a non-binary lover before they even would give that a name, to someone who never explained herself, never apologized, wrote what she wanted. And this is long before any of us came along. So to be able to do this, I don't know, I like to think I'm doing her proud. So that's my diva. But also kind of like what Xan was saying, I've also had people come back to me and say, and thank me for the book. We have, there's, to my knowledge, there was a young girl at the high school here, and her mom actually recognized me. I was out in public, and she said, "Hey, did you write Wicked Little Things?" I said, "Yes, I did." And her daughter apparently had been raving about it and wouldn't shut up about it and kept talking to her about it. And she said, because apparently she only likes to read queer fiction. She likes like Red, White, and Royal Blue and all that kind of thing. She had never read a book where the gay character had more to do than fall in love or come out.
Oh, wow.
So let that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it feels amazing to be able to write books that are about more than that. And also to be in a publishing house with, because all of us do that. None of our books are only about coming out and falling in love.
Yeah.
Like our characters have so much more going on. So just seeing that and seeing so many people now doing that as well. And I'm going to tear that, but it's pretty amazing. And yeah.
Yeah.
I think Colette would be proud.
Yeah. For me, I think, it's to write these things is as Chris said, like kind of instilling hope. But also I kind of like to think of it as like forging a pathway forward. Where from my perspective, like in the horror kind of genre, I think we're kind of experiencing this like renaissance of horror. And so we're getting to write these very gritty, dark stories for kids that when I was younger and I read like a lot of YA, I think that they kind of shied away from like some of the darker things, and we didn't get to explore that as much, and now it feels like we're able to kind of get into that a little bit more and explore things with like a lot more depth. And it feels good to be kind of from this perspective of trying to help forge a pathway forward and provide hope, and just keep kind of trucking on.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for sitting down to chat today. The last thing I would like all of you very briefly, if you could sum up how you hope your book makes readers feel in a word or a sentence or a sound even, just very briefly. I'd love to hear from everyone, just kind of what you hope readers get from your book.
I hope that they read it and see that the future can be positive for everyone.
I hope that they know anger is a tool that can be used in appropriate ways, and it's okay to feel your feelings.
I would hope that mine helps show someone the power that they already have.
Justin kind of stole mine, because that was actually what I was gonna say. I hope that my book leaves people with a sense that no matter how small and inconsequential they might feel, that we all have the power to do good in the world, even if it's just touching another person's life or bringing a smile to someone else in a day. That no matter how small and insignificant it might seem, we all have the power to do good and be good and bring light and hope into the world.
Well,
Here, I'll make mine. I was going to say, for you, Xan, I'll make mine different real quick. I hope to teach people. I hope to teach people to be nice, or a ghost will get you. I think that's
I like that.
That's the real takeaway.
Awesome. Well, amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. If you are interested in any of these books, you can get them from Tiny Ghost Press. Thank you so much again, all of you authors, for sitting down to chat, and happy Pride.
Thank you.
Happy Pride.
Thank you so much.